By 1450, the way Europeans lived had changed. The Middle Ages were disappearing. The Black Death had killed 1 out of every 3 Europeans. Their prayers had seemed to go unheard. Those who survived suddenly became richer. They had learned to live for the day. Tomorrow, they might become diseased and die. Better to enjoy life now, before you died. They also became more interested in making money. They ignored the Roman Catholic Church's rule against loaning money for profit. In Italy, some Italian merchants began lending money. This was the beginning of banking in Europe. The banking system helped grow trade. Venice and Genoa had become important trade ports in Italy. Ships sailed from these cities to ports in the Middle East. Merchants bought spices, herbs, silks, and other luxury goods. Then they returned to Italy. North Italy also had just about the only remaining industry in Europe. Some cities in North Italy were places where cloth was made. This meant that Italy was the wealthiest place in Europe. In addition, Italy was a very divided land. There was no country of Italy. There were just small city-states that made up the territory of Italy. This allowed more freedom in Italy. This freedom was necessary for getting trade going and making the economy profitable. In the Middle East, the Muslims had collected all the learning from around the Mediterranean. This included the books written in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome. Some of these books also continued to exist in the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was what had been the ancient Eastern Roman Empire. It had helped keep the ideas, culture, and literature of the ancients alive. In 1453, the Muslim Ottoman Turks attacked the Byzantine Empire's capital, Constantinople. They came over the walls, and they seized the city. Many of the Byzantine scholars had fled to the west before the city fell. They brought their books, their ideas, and their knowledge of ancient languages, especially Greek. In Italy, Italians began to make changes. They started replacing Latin with Italian in their writing. Dante wrote his famous work, the Inferno. It described the trip to the underworld where he saw what happened to people who had been major sinners. When he wrote the Inferno, Dante wrote it in Italian instead of Latin. Dante created the modern Italian language. Dante's poem, the Inferno, also helped spark an interest in languages. Soon learned Italians were busy learning not only Latin but ancient Greek. They could now read all the books written by the ancient Greeks and Romans. The Byzantines brought those books to Italy. There, they became instant best reads. The authors of the ancient books had very different ideas from those of the Middle Ages. They believed that humans were able to study and understand the world around them. They believed that people had the mental power to understand how the world worked. They also believed that what people understood could be used to improve their lives. The idea that people could understand the world by thinking and reasoning came to be called humanism. This humanist idea was the idea that changed everything in the Renaissance. Man did not have to accept things as they were. He could understand how things worked. He could improve his life. He could also make a profit improving it. He could determine the type of world he lives in. The humanists started writing new types of books. They stopped writing about how to live a religious life. They began writing about people in the world. Some of the humanists made fun of how people had been living. They suggested using your mind was a better way to live than just doing what had always been done. This, of course, did not go over well with many kings and with the Pope. Change was not on their list of things to happen. But the free-for-all political life of Italy made it much more difficult for rulers to stamp out change. And the ideas were really taking hold in the upper circles of Italian life. People were now interested in man. What could a man do? What could a man learn? What could a man achieve? These were questions the humanists wanted to investigate. Painters and sculptors began to study the human body. Leonardo da Vinci spent time studying human anatomy, how the human body is put together. He used what he learned to make the people he drew and sculpted as real as possible. Michelangelo, Raphael, and other famous Renaissance artists did the same thing. Writers began to study how people behaved. The most famous writer in English was the Renaissance author Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote poems. They were the model for English poetry for centuries to come. Shakespeare also wrote plays. His plays investigated what people did in certain circumstances. Romeo and Juliet were teenagers in love. Their families hated each other. How could they be together? Macbeth was a Scottish aristocrat. He's ambitious. He kills the king so he can become king. What will happen to Macbeth after committing such a foul murder? Hamlet learns his father was killed by his uncle so his uncle could become king. What should Hamlet do about what he has learned? Each play is a study of how human minds and hearts work. Machiavelli studied how men should act if they were rulers. He wrote a manual on successful rule. It was called The Prince. Machiavelli saw people as naturally bad. He believed that one could not be a successful ruler by being a nice guy. Successful rulers needed to be ruthless. They needed to make those they ruled fear them. They needed to do whatever was necessary to create that fear. In many ways, Machiavelli was just saying clearly what had become the way of political life in Italy. The powerful use their power to get more power. A powerful person could never relax. There was always someone wanting to replace him. It was important to identify those aspiring to your power. Once you knew who they were, you needed to eliminate them. You had to beat them down before they beat you up and took your position. Ruthless pursuit of power was how Machiavelli believed the world of politics operated. Machiavelli's ideas of politics became what was considered normal in the Renaissance. These ideas changed how rulers across Europe set out to rule their countries.